All right, guys, welcome on back to the show. We're in our final segment of tonight's show, and we're going to be doing some college football talk. We're going to be talking about the Florida Gators and their 2025 season outlook here in the College Corner. I have the Gators hopefully getting better and better this year. I think they're going to have a better team this year than they did last year. And last year, although it was an up and down season for the Gators, they started pretty bad. They did go on a 4-game win streak to end the year last year, and that was largely in part because of their quarterback who is returning for his sophomore season, DJ Lagway, leading the way. He was 6-0 as the Gators starter last year. Of course, he bounced in and out of the lineup with different injuries and all that. And plus, he was a freshman, so he wasn't the starter. But he started the last few games for the Gators, and they were on a 4-game win streak to end the year. Got to a bowl game, won that. And taking a look at what they've done in the offseason so far, they've recruited pretty well at the wide receiver position. Vernell Brown and Dallas Wilson both are near 5-star recruits coming out of high school in Gainesville and Tampa, respectively. I think Vernell Brown in particular is a good addition to a pretty solid receiver room overall. They did also pick up some transfer window or transfer portal guys like UCLA wide receiver J. Michael Sturdivant. They added him to the wide receiver room, so that'll be an improvement for the Gators overall. They returned 7 starters on offense as well as 8 on defense, and including offensive lineman and center, All-American center Jake Slaughter and left tackle Austin Barber, both returning to solidify that offensive line, which should be much better and is definitely the strength of this team overall. And they're going to need, they're going to need that going up against a pretty solid schedule, pretty tough schedule that they have this year. And it's usually the case anyway in the SEC, but in particular this year, there's a lot of really good teams out there in the SEC. On defense, they returned a trio of defensive linemen that combined got 16.5 sacks last year, and that is defensive end Tyreek Sapp, George Gums Jr., and Caleb Banks on that defensive line. And I think the defensive line it's been a big issue. That's whenever I watch the Florida Gator games as a fan, that's the one thing that I always, when I talk to a friend of mine who's also a Gator fan when we're watching the games, one thing that I always sticks out to me is the Gators typically always have a good defense. Has not been the case in recent years. That's really been their issue. A lot of the time when they had good defense, it was the offense that was the issue. The offense has since gotten better. Now the defense needs to, get to their end of the bargain as well and pick up their other end of the couch, as you say. So, the secondary also, they're returning 4 starters. That should be a pretty solid secondary overall. It should be an overall improved group on defense and on offense, but I really like what they could potentially do this year. This past season, they went 8-5 overall. So before, the games that DJ Lagway did not start or finish in, they were 2-5, and they were 6-0 in games that he did start in and finish in. So, he should be an improvement overall. They've got a whole new quarterback room. Graham Hertz is no longer there, of course. So they should be better offensively, and I really like what they could potentially have. I mean, now Billy Napier, he is, of course, the head coach in his 6th season. This might be the team that is probably the best on paper that he's had in his tenure. He hasn't had a great tenure in Florida, but not a lot of head coaches have had great tenure since the Tim Tebow days. Or you could maybe make the argument that back when Kyle Trask was there, playing really well, of course they went 11-1 one year under Kyle Trask, and they were good that year, but they weren't really, national title contenders, not serious ones anyway. So I think they got a long way to go before they get to that point. But DJ Lagway actually, and I learned this when I was doing research on other college segments a few weeks ago, but DJ Lagway has actually got the 5th best odds to win the Heisman. Now, obviously, that's super, super early because we're still in spring ball, spring training, and all that stuff. But the fact that he's up there, that just shows you his potential. He could potentially be, if everything works out and he ends up being the guy that people hope that he can be, the Gators can be very competitive in the SEC and the SEC East in particular. But they've got a lot of tough games coming up. Texas, of course, they're going to have to be going up against Arch Manning, and they're getting a lot of hype in the SEC. They should be the favorites in the SEC, Texas, that is. Georgia, of course, is always going to be a challenge, that Florida-Georgia rivalry every single year. World's largest cocktail party is what they used to call it, but they don't call it that anymore, I don't believe. But, that's always a tough game. Game against Tennessee in the Swamp later in the year, that's going to be tough as well. The game against LSU is also going to be tough. They've got a good quarterback situation, good offense there. And, of course, Brian Kelly, the head coach there, starting to really find his groove at LSU since coming there a few years ago. But I think they could get to about 9 or 10 wins overall this coming season. It's just going to kind of all depend on how DJ Lagway kind of comes along in his sophomore season. Showed a lot of promise in that freshman year. But he's got some wide receivers that he can throw to. Like I said, Dallas Wilson, Vernell Brown, those are two young guys that should come in and contribute pretty soon or right away or pretty close to right away, And with those 7 returning starters on offense and the 8 on defense, that just brings more continuity to that team and just keeps it more stable. You've got one of the best centers in the country in Jake Slaughter. The offensive line, like I said, should be very, very good this year. Their running back room is still pretty solid. They return a couple of guys that they had last year as well. So they should be solid there at that position. But we'll see what they do overall. SEC East is always a tough division to kind of crack, especially with these teams that are increasing, their talent over the years. Tennessee has always been a tough game for the Gators. Kentucky has usually been a pretty tough game in recent years for the Gators. Now, I'm not saying Kentucky is a world beater or anything like that, but it's still going to be a tough game. And also South Carolina. South Carolina is one of the best defensive teams in all of the SEC, and they should be just as good this year too. And that's going to be a team that's going to be hard to beat as well. So you got to think that's another team that they're going to have to get around at some point. If they want to get to where they want to get to, which, of course, is the SEC championship game. And I think that they can contend in the SEC East. Don't think that they'll win the SEC East. I just think there's too many good teams in that division. I think LSU probably won't win the West, but they'll compete in the West, I think. Georgia in the East Georgia and Tennessee, I think, are probably right up there, too, as being pretty competitive in that division as well. We'll see what they end up doing as the season goes along and everything. But this, I think, is a very pivotal year for Billy Napier and that coaching staff. They've got a solid team. They've gotten a pretty good recruiting class, one of the best in the country. They've got a young quarterback that has shown great promise as a freshman, should improve this year. So at this point, you've got to see some significant improvement or significant signs of improvement if you're Billy Napier. Otherwise, you could potentially look at Billy Napier being out the door at the end of the year and they're starting from scratch again, trying to cycle through all these coaches since Urban Meyer has just not really been, very productive. You've had guys like, Dan Mullen, who, of course, used to be the offensive coordinator when Urban Meyer was here, and that didn't really work out either. You've had a ton of other guys in there and just hasn't really, they're not necessarily Ron Zook or anything like that for any of you guys who remember Ron Zook. That was an interesting era to say the least, but they're no Steve Spurriers either. So, there's just been kind of a mixed bag of talent or lack of talent at the coaching position. I think Billy Napier is a decent coach. I'm not a Billy Napier guy. I'm not like a Billy Napier supporter. I want him to do well, obviously, because I'm a Gators fan, but I just don't think that he's ultimately the guy that's going to lead them to, say, a national championship or something like that. They're going to need to get better in a lot of other aspects before they start thinking about national championship. But I know there are some people in that building in this particular offseason or spring that are thinking playoffs or bust, really. Like, I don't think that. I don't think the Gators are a playoff team this year. I think they could threaten to get into a playoff spot with this expanded playoff that college football has now. But I still don't think they're going to be, good enough. It's not that they're a bad team. I just think their schedule is too tough for them to be a playoff team this particular season. Maybe if DJ comes back for his junior year, maybe they have a better shot at making the playoffs then, because if that's the case, then that's 3 years of starting, 3 years of continuity, and you would think that they're probably going to return a couple of guys that are also returning this year. If DJ ends up staying, if he ends up having a really good year this year and ends up staying, then they could really be in the running for a playoff spot and probably would start the season in the top 25 at least. And we'll see, what they decide or what they end up doing overall. But I have the Gators getting to about 9 wins. I think they can do 1 win better. Maybe take one of those tough games, like maybe that game against Tennessee in the Swamp. I like them there. It's going to be a tough matchup, though, with Tennessee and all the weapons that they have. But I think Tennessee probably that makes the most sense in terms of a game that they could win because it's in the Swamp and they've had success against Tennessee in the past. Now, I know all of those teams, Texas, Tennessee, Georgia, all of those teams were in the playoffs last year. So it's going to be tough. It's not going to be easy for the Gators at all. And the Georgia game is always tough. Kirby Smart is a hell of a coach, one of the best in the SEC for sure. He's got multiple national championships for a reason. And, of course, he was an assistant at Alabama when they were winning national championships under Nick Saban. So he comes from a very good coaching tree, and he has proven to be a very good head coach himself. So that's going to be a tough game. Texas is going to be tough because of the Arch Manning hype and everything. It's going to be interesting to see Arch Manning overall in the SEC, too, as a starter. He played a couple games last year, when Quinn Ewers was out. But I think Arch Manning could potentially have a real future in the NFL, and this year's going to kind of go a long way in determining where he gets drafted. Now, he's going to probably get drafted pretty high simply because of the fact that he's a Manning. But if he backs that Manning name up with some quality play, he could end up being one of the first players taken in the draft next year. And there'll be a lot of teams that'll need quarterbacks, as they always are. Every year, there's always a few teams that do need them. So Steelers are one of them. Don't think that they're going to get Arch Manning because they're going to have to probably pick in the top 3 or something like that in order to get him. Otherwise, they can trade up and try and get him that way. But, so the SEC is scheduled to be very tough. And the Gators, they're going to have to get through it. If you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. That's just the way it is. And although the SEC is maybe not necessarily the conference that it once was, the Big Ten has seemed to catch them as being the best conference in football and college football right now. But that doesn't mean that the SEC doesn't have good teams. There's a number of good teams that I didn't even mention here. Vanderbilt can be, sneaky sometimes. They're never really in the running to do any kind of damage in the SEC, but they're just always that team that they're sneaky. If you go sleeping, especially if it's at Vandy, if you go in there sleeping, they could shock you and they could end up beating you. It's happened before, and they're just a scrappy team. So those games are going to be hard too. The only games that are probably not going to be hard are their outside of conference or their outer conference division or outer conference matchups against teams that are paying them, or teams that are getting paid to come to the Swamp and get a beatdown, basically. You see it at the beginning of every college football season. That's why the first couple weeks of college football is not necessarily exciting matchups, because there are a lot of really, really good teams playing a lot of Division II schools and all that. And they're usually ended up being like 65-0 or something like that. So overall, I like where the Gators are heading. I think they're trending in the right direction. But I still got them about 9 wins this year and missing the playoffs. Obviously, 9 wins is a bowl game, so that's something. But, it's not the playoffs, which is where you want to be. So that's my Gators outlook. I'm going to continue the SEC in tomorrow's show as well. I'm probably going to talk a little bit about one of the Gators' biggest rivals, and that's the Georgia Bulldogs. They've got a little bit more positive outlook overall in terms of competing for a national championship and all that. But we'll get into that tomorrow when we talk about the Bulldogs. But that covers it for the show tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed doing the research and everything and getting this show together. Again, I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to do the show last night because of all the technical difficulties and everything that I was having, which is kind of unforeseen. So it was a little unfortunate. But I do thank you guys all for tuning in to the GSMC Football Podcast, though. We're, of course, as always, presented by the GSMC Sports Network on this show. And if you have a question or anything like that, of course, you can definitely comment, like I said. But your support does mean a lot to us. So just please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does help us out when you guys do that. It gets more eyes on our content, and everything. So we also invite you to follow us on all the social medias, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for all of those content and updates. And thank you once again, and have a wonderful night. We'll see you guys same time, same place tomorrow night. So have a good night, guys. We'll talk to you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to